Ethan Carter adjusted the autopilot settings of his sleek Tesla. The electric hum of the car, a sharp contrast to the chaotic symphony of the storm outside. The rain lashed against the windshield, a rhythmic reminder of nature's power, while inside, the cabin was a cocoon of sophistication. Yet the man behind the wheel felt an unshakable emptiness. Success had brought him wealth, influence, and recognition, but no solace. Tonight was important. The merger deal he'd worked on for months was finally within grasp. This was the kind of opportunity that could place his company, Carter Innovations, at the forefront of global technological breakthroughs. But as the rain blurred the city lights, his mind drifted to a persistent void he couldn't quite define. As Ethan approached a stoplight on the deserted streets, the shadow of a figure under the weak glow of a street lamp caught his eye. A woman, drenched to the bone, clutched a small child tightly against her chest. Her tattered coat was inadequate against the downpour, and she appeared to be shielding the child with her own body. Ethan's fingers tightened around the steering wheel, an internal struggle already brewing. "Not my problem," he muttered as the light turned green. Yet, as the car rolled forward, something made him glance in the rearview mirror. The woman had sunk to her knees, still holding the child. The faint outline of desperation etched into her posture. "Keep going, Ethan," he told himself, his foot pressing down on the accelerator. But the words rang hollow. Moments later, the figure of a man emerged from the shadows behind her. He was tall, hooded, and his gait exuded menace. The woman tried to rise, panic evident in her movements, but she slipped, clutching the child tighter. Ethan slammed the brakes, his heart pounding. His logical mind screamed at him to drive away, to focus on the night's agenda. Yet, his body acted on instinct. Throwing open the door, he stepped out into the rain. The chill soaked through his tailored suit instantly, but he barely noticed. His voice cut through the storm, steady and commanding. "Hey, step away from her." The hooded man froze for a moment, his face obscured, then disappeared into the darkness, swallowed by the labyrinth of alleys. Ethan approached cautiously, his eyes darting around to ensure the threat had truly passed. The woman looked up at him, her blue eyes wide with fear and exhaustion. "Are you okay?" Ethan asked, his voice softer now. She nodded weakly but didn't speak. Her trembling hands clutched the child protectively, as though shielding her from the world. Ethan's gaze dropped to her knees, one of which was visibly swollen and bruised. "You're hurt," he observed, crouching to her level. "It's nothing," she replied, her voice barely audible over the rain. "It's not nothing," Ethan said firmly. He glanced at the child, who was eerily silent, bundled tightly in a soaked blanket. "Let me help you. You can't stay here." For a moment she hesitated, her eyes searching his for signs of ulterior motives. Ethan recognized the look. It was one of someone who had learned not to trust. Finally she nodded. "Thank you," she whispered. As Ethan helped her to her feet, her weight sagged against him, and he realized just how frail she was. Guiding her to his car, he opened the passenger door and adjusted the seat for her and the child. "What's your name?" he asked, as he slid into the driver's seat. "Sarah," she said softly, her voice cracking. "Sarah Williams. And this is Lily." Ethan glanced at the small, pale face peeking out from the blanket. Oh, something stirred in him, a strange protective instinct he couldn't explain. The rain seemed to ease slightly as he pulled onto the main road, heading toward the nearest hospital. For the first time that evening, Ethan felt the tension in his chest shift, not from the weight of corporate ambitions, but from the uncertainty of a choice he hadn't fully understood when he made it. Ethan guided the Tesla through the slick streets of San Francisco, the rhythmic swish of the windshield wipers filling the otherwise silent car. His passenger, Sarah Williams, sat huddled in the passenger seat, her soaked clothes clinging to her frame. In her arms, the tiny figure of Lily lay motionless, cocooned in a damp blanket. Ethan couldn't help but glance at them every few moments, his mind racing with questions he wasn't sure he should ask. "Are you sure she's okay?" Ethan finally broke the silence, his voice laced with concern. Sarah looked down at Lily, brushing a strand of damp hair from the baby's forehead. "She's just exhausted. It's been a long day," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan tightened his grip on the steering wheel, his gaze flicking between the road and the frail figures beside him. The storm had lessened, but the city streets remained treacherous. His mind flashed back to the hooded man who had retreated into the shadows. What if he comes back? The thought sent a chill through him, sharper than the rain that had soaked his clothes earlier. "We're almost there," Ethan assured her, trying to inject some steadiness into his tone. "The hospital is just a few minutes away." Sarah nodded, but remained silent, her eyes fixed on Lily, as though the child was the only tether keeping her grounded. The hospital lobby was a stark contrast to the chaos of the storm outside, bright, clean, and humming, with the muted efficiency of late-night operations. A nurse at the reception desk looked up as Ethan entered, supporting Sarah, who limped heavily on her injured leg. "She needs help," Ethan said, his voice firm but calm. "And the baby. Can someone take a look at her?" The nurse, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, stood immediately. "Of course. Let's get them checked in." She signaled for a wheelchair and gestured toward an empty triage room. Ethan helped Sarah into the wheelchair, then instinctively reached out for Lily. Sarah hesitated, her grip tightening on the child. Ethan paused, meeting her wary gaze. "It's okay," he said softly. "I'll be careful." After a moment, she relinquished Lily into his arms. The baby stirred slightly, her tiny fingers clutching at the edge of the blanket. Ethan cradled her with surprising ease, his movements careful and deliberate. An hour later, Ethan found himself sitting in the hospital's waiting area, staring at the linoleum floor. He had insisted on paying for Sarah and Lily's care, brushing off her protests with a simple, "Let me handle this." Now he waited, the weight of the night pressing heavily on him. When the nurse finally approached, Ethan rose immediately. "She's stable," the nurse informed him. "The baby is fine, just cold and tired. As for Ms. Williams, her knee is sprained, and she'll need to rest for a few weeks. We've provided her with a brace and some pain medication." Ethan exhaled, relief washing over him. "Thank you," he said, his gratitude evident. The nurse hesitated for a moment, then added, "She seems on edge, like she's afraid of something or someone." Ethan frowned. "Did she say anything about that?" The nurse shook her head. "No, but I've seen this before. It's not uncommon in cases involving difficult situations." Ethan returned to Sarah's room, finding her sitting upright in the hospital bed. Lily was curled up beside her, sleeping peacefully. Sarah looked up as he entered, her expression a mix of gratitude and embarrassment. "You didn't have to stay," she said, her voice soft. "I wanted to make sure you were okay," Ethan replied, pulling a chair up to the bed. "And you don't have to worry about the bill. It's taken care of." Sarah looked down, her hands fidgeting with the edge of the blanket. "I don't know how to thank you," she said. "You've done so much already." Ethan waved off her words. "It's not about gratitude. You needed help. Anyone would have done the same." Sarah smiled faintly, though her eyes betrayed her doubt. "Not everyone would stop for a stranger in the rain," she said. For a moment, silence hung between them, broken only by the steady beeping of the heart monitor. Then, Ethan leaned forward slightly. "Sarah," he began carefully, "I don't mean to pry, but what happened tonight? Why were you out there, in the rain, with Lily?" Sarah's shoulders tensed, and she glanced down at the sleeping child. "It's complicated," she said. "I left home to protect Lily. Her father—" She stopped, her voice catching. "He's not a good man, and I couldn't let her grow up in that kind of environment." Ethan nodded, his expression thoughtful. "And the man who approached you, do you know him?" Sarah shook her head. "Number. But I've felt like someone's been watching us ever since we left." Ethan's jaw tightened. "You're safe now," he said firmly. "No one's going to hurt you or Lily." Sarah looked up at him, her blue eyes filled with gratitude. And something else. Hope. As Ethan left the hospital, promising to check on Sarah and Lily the next day, he couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that lingered in his chest. His mind replayed the nurse's words, Sarah's story, and the image of the hooded man disappearing into the shadows. When he reached the parking lot, he paused, scanning the area. That's when he noticed it. A dark van parked across the street, its engine idling. For a moment, Ethan stood frozen, his instincts screaming that something was wrong. The van's headlights flashed on, and it pulled away, merging into the flow of traffic. Ethan watched it disappear into the night, a cold certainty settling over him. This wasn't over. Ethan stepped into the towering glass skyscraper that housed his tech empire. The grand lobby gleamed with marble floors and minimalist decor, every inch a testament to his success. Yet, as he crossed the space, his reflection flickering on the polished walls, Ethan felt a dissonance that even the building's pristine elegance couldn't erase. His mind was elsewhere, tangled in the events of the previous night. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, and Ethan stepped inside, leaning against the steel wall. The quiet hum of the ascent was interrupted by his phone vibrating in his pocket. It was Alyssa, his assistant. "Ethan, the board's been waiting for 20 minutes. They're restless." Her voice crackled through the line. "I'm on my way," Ethan replied, his tone clipped but calm. As the elevator continued its ascent, Ethan's thoughts drifted back to Sarah and Lily. He had done what he could for them, hadn't he? Paid the hospital bills, ensured their safety, for now. But the gnawing feeling in his chest remained, an unrelenting whisper that he hadn't done enough. The boardroom was a stark contrast to the stormy night Ethan had left behind. Rows of leather chairs surrounded a sleek mahogany table, where his partners sat in varying degrees of impatience. Their murmurs stilled as Ethan entered. "Finally," James Hartford, one of the senior partners, muttered, his tone laced with disapproval. "Care to explain your tardiness, Ethan?" Ethan ignored the jab, moving to the head of the table. "Apologies for the delay," he said smoothly, though his usual commanding presence felt slightly frayed. "Let's get started." The presentation began, and Ethan fell into the rhythm of corporate maneuvering. Slides projected growth charts, market projections, and product innovations. The room buzzed with discussions and counterpoints, but for once, Ethan struggled to fully engage. His usual precision faltered, and the words on the screen blurred as his thoughts wandered back to Sarah's fearful gaze and Lily's fragile form. "You seem distracted," James noted during a brief recess, pulling Ethan aside. "This merger is critical, Ethan. You can't afford to lose focus now." Ethan met James's gaze, his jaw tightening. "I'm aware," he said curtly. But as James walked away, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that his priorities were shifting in ways he hadn't anticipated. Later that evening, Ethan sat alone in his expansive office, the city's skyline stretching beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. The room was quiet, except for the faint hum of his computer, which displayed a paused slide deck. A glass of whiskey sat untouched on the desk. Ethan pulled out his phone and dialed Ryan, the private investigator he had hired years ago for discreet background checks. Ryan was efficient, thorough, and most importantly, trustworthy. "Ryan," Ethan said when the call connected, "I need you to look into someone for me. Her name's Sarah Williams." Ryan's response was brisk. "Got it. Anything specific I should be looking for?" "Everything," Ethan said. "Her past, her connections, and anything that might explain why she's being followed." Ryan hesitated briefly. "Ethan, is this about business?" "No," Ethan admitted, his voice firm. "It's personal." 2 days later, Ryan called with an update. Ethan was in the middle of reviewing reports when his phone buzzed. He answered immediately. "Ethan," Ryan began, his tone grave, "you were right. Sarah Williams isn't just running from a bad relationship. There's more." Ethan leaned back in his chair, his grip tightening on the phone. "Go on." "Her father, Henry Williams," Ryan continued, "has a history of bad debts. Turns out he owed money to a man named Marcos Bennett, a name that rings alarm bells. Loan shark, known for trafficking, extortion, and making examples out of people who don't pay up." Ethan's stomach twisted. "And Sarah?" "Henry's debts caught up to her. Marcos has been using her as leverage, trying to flush her out since her father vanished. She's not just fleeing an abusive ex, she's running from a network." Ethan's mind raced. The image of Sarah clutching Lily under the rain burned brighter in his memory. "Does Marcos know where she is?" "Not yet," Ryan said. "But if she stays put too long, it's only a matter of time." The revelation weighed heavily on Ethan as he drove back to his penthouse that night. The city lights blurred through the windshield, mirroring the chaos in his mind. He parked in the underground garage and took the elevator up, the hum of the lift doing little to drown out his thoughts. In the penthouse, Ethan poured himself a drink and stood by the window, staring at the city below. The same question looped through his mind. What now? He had no obligation to Sarah or Lily, beyond the kindness he had already extended. But walking away felt impossible. The thought of them alone, vulnerable to a man like Marcos, churned his gut. Ethan set the glass down and picked up his phone. This time, he called Alyssa. "Alyssa, I need you to set up a meeting with Ryan and a security consultant first thing tomorrow," he said, "and clear my schedule for the afternoon." "Understood," Alyssa replied, her tone professional but curious. "Anything else?" "Yes," Ethan said after a pause. "Keep this off the books. No records, no names." As he hung up, Ethan felt a sense of resolve settle over him. He didn't have all the answers yet, but he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't about to let Sarah and Lily face this alone. The morning sun filtered through the glass walls of Ethan's office, painting the room in golden hues. Despite the tranquil view of the city skyline, tension hung thick in the air as Ethan sat across from Ryan, the private investigator, and Victor, a seasoned security consultant with years of experience dealing with high-stakes threats. Ryan slid a manila folder across the desk, the edges frayed from use. "This is everything I could find on Marcos Bennett and his network," he began, his tone grave. "Loan sharking is just the tip of the iceberg. He's running a full-blown trafficking syndicate, extending into Seattle's corporate underbelly." Ethan flipped through the folder, his jaw tightening as he scanned the damning evidence, photographs of underhanded deals, connections to corrupt officials, and a trail of victims. "And Sarah's father?" he asked, his voice steady but cold. Victor, the security consultant, answered this time. "Henry Williams disappeared after racking up debts with Marcos. It's likely Marcos is using Sarah to lure him out, or settle the debt another way. Ethan's fist clenched involuntarily. The image of Sarah's frightened eyes and Lily's innocent face burned in his mind. And Sarah? How much danger is she in right now? Ryan leaned forward, his voice dropping. If Marcos figures out where she is, he won't hesitate. She's an easy target, especially with a child. You've already intervened once, which puts you on his radar too. Later that day, Ethan arrived at the apartment, where Sarah and Lily were temporarily staying. The modest space was secure, but far from comforting. Sarah opened the door cautiously, her face pale but relieved to see him. Lily clung to her mother's leg, peeking curiously at Ethan. "We need to talk," Ethan said, stepping inside. He glanced around, noting the drawn curtains and the faint hum of the security system he had installed. "There's more to this than we initially thought." Sarah sat on the edge of the worn couch, her hands clasped tightly. "What is it?" she asked, her voice trembling. Ethan hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "Ryan's investigation uncovered some things about your father. His debts with Marcos run deeper than we realized, and Marcos has been using you as leverage." Sarah's face fell, her shoulders slumping, as if the weight of the revelation physically pressed down on her. "I knew my father had problems, but I didn't realize it would follow me like this." Ethan crouched in front of her, his voice firm but gentle. "You don't have to face this alone. We'll figure it out." Lily toddled over, clutching a small stuffed animal, and reached for Ethan. He picked her up instinctively. The child's innocent trust, a stark contrast to the chaos surrounding them. "We'll keep you safe," he promised, looking between mother and daughter. That evening, Ethan worked with Victor to fortify the apartment's security. Cameras were installed, entry points reinforced, and escape routes planned. Sarah watched silently, holding Lily close as the team worked. "I don't understand why you're doing all this," she said quietly when Ethan joined her on the balcony. The cool night air carried the distant hum of the city. "You don't even know me." Ethan leaned against the railing, his gaze fixed on the twinkling lights below. "I didn't know you when I saw you in the rain either, but I couldn't walk away then, and I can't walk away now." For the first time, Sarah's guarded expression softened. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you." "You don't have to," Ethan replied, his tone resolute. "Just focus on Lily and staying safe." The fragile peace was shattered the next night. Sarah woke to the sound of glass shattering, her heart racing as she grabbed Lily from her crib. The security alarm blared, piercing through the darkness. Ethan's phone buzzed on the nightstand in his penthouse. He answered groggily, his instincts kicking in, as Victor's voice barked through the line. "We've got a breach at Sarah's apartment. Marcos's men." Ethan didn't waste a second. He grabbed his keys and bolted out the door, adrenaline propelling him through the quiet streets. As he approached the building, he saw the flashing lights of police cars and the dark silhouettes of officers securing the scene. Inside, Sarah was sitting on the couch, her face pale and tear-streaked. Lily was wrapped in a blanket, her small body trembling, as an officer tried to comfort her. Ethan rushed to them, kneeling beside Sarah. "Are you okay?" he asked, scanning her for injuries. They tried to break in," she stammered, her voice shaking. "The security system scared them off, but they left this." She handed him a crumpled piece of paper, the words scrawled in jagged handwriting. "You can't hide forever." Ethan's hand tightened around the note, his jaw clenching as anger surged through him. "This ends now," he said, his voice low and steady. "We're taking the fight to them." The next morning, Ethan and Ryan met with Detective Laura Mason, a seasoned investigator known for her relentless pursuit of justice. Laura had grown disillusioned with the corruption in her department, but saw an opportunity for redemption in Ethan's case. "This isn't just about Sarah and her father," Laura said, spreading a map across the table. Red markers indicated known locations tied to Marcos's operations. Marcos has a network that extends far beyond this city. Taking him down will require more than just protecting one family. Ethan studied the map, his mind racing. "What do we need?" "Evidence," Laura replied. "Solid, irrefutable evidence that ties Marcos to trafficking and corruption, and witnesses willing to testify." Ryan chimed in. "We have leads, but it's risky. Marcos has eyes everywhere." Ethan nodded, his resolve hardening. Whatever it takes. Ethan arrived at the secure apartment early in the morning, carrying a bag of breakfast pastries and fresh coffee. The weight of the previous night's events lingered in the air, but he knew today was about building something Sarah desperately needed: trust. For the first time since her ordeal began, she deserved to feel safe, even if only for a moment. Inside, Sarah sat on the living room floor, playing with Lily. The child's laughter echoed faintly in the small space, a sound Ethan found oddly grounding. As he stepped in, Sarah glanced up, offering a small, tired smile. "Good morning," Ethan greeted, placing the bag on the kitchen counter. "Thought you could use something other than toast and coffee from the machine." Sarah chuckled softly, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "You didn't have to do that." "I know," Ethan replied, his tone light. "But I wanted to." The morning passed with a surprising ease. Lily giggled as Ethan attempted to build block towers that the toddler promptly knocked over with glee. For the first time in days, Sarah allowed herself to laugh, the sound feeling foreign but welcome. Ethan watched the scene unfold, his admiration for her resilience growing. "You're good with her," Sarah said, breaking the silence as Lily toddled away with her stuffed rabbit. Ethan shrugged. "I like to think kids are easier to understand than most adults. They're honest, even when they're messy." Sarah nodded, her expression softening. "She's my reason for everything. I couldn't bear to let her grow up in fear." Ethan met her gaze, his voice gentle but firm. "She won't have to. I'll make sure of that." As the day wore on, Victor arrived to update Ethan on their security measures. He brought news that the team had fortified the apartment further, adding new surveillance cameras and setting up protocols for emergencies. Sarah listened intently, her expression a mix of gratitude and apprehension. "Victor," Ethan asked, leaning against the kitchen counter, "how confident are you that we're covered here?" Victor hesitated. "Confident, but nothing's ever foolproof. Marcos's men are persistent. If they want to find someone, they will keep trying." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Then we'll stay one step ahead." Sarah interrupted, her voice quiet but resolute. "I don't want to live like this forever, Ethan. Looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next threat. It's not a life for Lily." Ethan turned to her, his gaze steady. "We're not just playing defense anymore, Sarah. We're going to take this fight to them." Later that evening, Sarah received a package addressed to her. Nervously, she opened it under Ethan's watchful eye. Inside was a simple envelope containing photographs of her and Lily, taken at various times over the past few weeks. The implication was clear. They were being watched. Ethan's face darkened as he flipped through the images. This isn't just intimidation. It's a message. Sarah sank onto the couch, her hands trembling. What do they want from me? I've done nothing but try to escape. Ethan sat beside her, placing a reassuring hand on hers. They want fear, control. But they won't get it, Sarah. We won't let them. Determined to shift the power dynamic, Ethan contacted Detective Laura Mason. Together, they devised a plan to expose Marcos's network by infiltrating one of his known meeting spots, a high-end club frequented by his associates. Ryan worked tirelessly to gather intelligence, identifying key players and tracking their movements. Sarah, meanwhile, began taking steps to regain control over her life. With Ethan's encouragement, she started self-defense classes, learning basic skills to protect herself and Lily. The lessons were empowering, reminding her of a strength she thought she'd lost. One afternoon, Ethan watched as Sarah practiced a takedown maneuver with her instructor. Her determination was palpable, each move driven by a fierce desire to never feel helpless again. "You're getting better," Ethan said, as she joined him on the sidelines, wiping sweat from her brow. "I have to," she replied simply, her voice steady. For Lily, the plan to confront Marcos's network took shape over the next week. Ethan arranged for Sarah and Lily to be temporarily relocated to a safe house, guarded by Victor's most trusted team members. Though reluctant to leave, Sarah knew it was necessary. "I'll be back before you know it," Ethan promised as he helped her pack a small bag. "And when I am, we'll have a plan to end this." Sarah nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Thank you, Ethan, for everything." Ethan hesitated for a moment, then placed a hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to thank me, Sarah. Just trust me." On the night of the operation, Ethan and Laura entered the club under the guise of potential investors looking to connect with Marcos's associates. The atmosphere was loud and opulent, with laughter and music masking the undercurrent of criminal dealings. Ryan, stationed in a surveillance van outside, fed them live updates through earpieces. "Marcos isn't here, but his right-hand man, Vincent, is. He'll have the information we need." Ethan and Laura approached Vincent, engaging him in a carefully crafted conversation that hinted at mutual business interests. The man, drunk and overconfident, revealed more than he intended, dropping names and locations tied to the syndicate. "Got it," Ryan whispered in their ears. "We've got what we need." But as Ethan and Laura turned to leave, their cover was blown. One of Marcos's men recognized Laura from her time on the force. Chaos erupted as they fought their way out, narrowly escaping through a back exit. When Ethan returned to the safe house, his face was bruised and his suit was torn. But he carried a folder filled with damning evidence against Marcos's network. Sarah rushed to him, her concern evident. "What happened?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Progress," Ethan replied, handing her the folder. "This is the beginning of the end for Marcos." Sarah flipped through the documents, her eyes widening as she saw the names and connections laid bare. For the first time, she felt a flicker of hope. "Thank you," she said, looking up at Ethan. "I don't know how to repay you." "You don't have to," he replied softly. "We're in this together." The morning sun filtered through the blinds of Ethan's penthouse, casting a golden glow out over the meticulously organized chaos of his living room. Maps, photos, and documents cluttered the coffee table, remnants of the ongoing investigation into Marcos's criminal network. Ethan stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, phone pressed to his ear as he spoke with Ryan. "Do we have a lead on Marcos's key players?" Ethan asked, his voice sharp with determination. Ryan's response crackled through the line. "I've been tracking their movements. Marcos's men are cautious, but we've identified several warehouses in Seattle where they operate. One of them could be a major hub for their trafficking network." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Good work. Let's bring this to Detective Mason and start planning our next move." Across town, Sarah was settling into the safe house, a modest but secure apartment with reinforced locks and 24/7 surveillance. Lily, oblivious to the dangers surrounding them, played on the living room floor with a new set of blocks Ethan had brought her. Sarah watched her daughter with a mix of relief and anxiety. The safe house was a temporary haven, but the shadow of Marcos's syndicate loomed large in her mind. The thought of her father's potential involvement only added to her unease. A knock at the door startled her. Victor, standing guard outside, entered with a calm but serious demeanor. "Miss Williams, Ethan wants to check in with you later today. In the meantime, if you need anything, let me know," Victor said. "Thank you, Victor," Sarah replied, her voice soft but steady. I want this nightmare to end." Meanwhile, Ethan met Detective Laura Mason at a downtown coffee shop. Laura, a seasoned investigator with a no-nonsense attitude, had grown increasingly frustrated with the systemic corruption in her department. Teaming up with Ethan offered her a rare opportunity to strike at the heart of a criminal network she had been trying to dismantle for years. Laura spread out a map of Seattle on the table, marking several locations with red pins. "These are the warehouses Ryan identified. We've been monitoring them for months, but getting a warrant has been impossible with the red tape. Marcos has too many people in his pocket." Ethan studied the map intently. "Then we don't wait for a warrant. We gather evidence ourselves and force the authorities to act." Laura smirked. "I like your style, Carter, but it's risky." "Riskier than doing nothing," Ethan countered. That evening, Ryan uncovered a surprising lead. Through hacked communications, he discovered a meeting scheduled at one of the warehouses between Marcos and a new ally, an influential businessman named Richard Ellis. Ellis, known for his philanthropy, was secretly using his wealth to fund Marcos's operations. Ethan relayed the information to Laura and Sarah during a video call. "This isn't just about Marcos anymore," Ethan explained. "Ellis is a high-profile figure with connections to Seattle's elite. If we can expose him, it could unravel the entire network." Sarah, her face appearing on Ethan's laptop screen, looked troubled. "Ellis? I've heard that name. He funded several community projects back in my hometown. I thought he was a hero." "Looks can be deceiving," Laura said grimly. "People like Ellis thrive on hiding in plain sight." The next day, Ethan, Laura, and Ryan devised a plan to infiltrate the warehouse during the meeting. Sarah insisted on helping, refusing to remain a passive observer. "I can't just sit here while you risk everything," she argued during a heated discussion with Ethan. "Sarah, it's too dangerous," Ethan replied, his tone firm. "And it's my life they've turned into a battleground," she shot back. "I need to fight for Lily's future." Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "All right, but you stay with Laura. No unnecessary risks." On the night of the operation, the team prepared for the infiltration. Ethan donned a black jacket with concealed body armor, while Laura checked her weapon, her expression focused. Ryan monitored the situation from a surveillance van parked a few blocks away, feeding real-time updates through earpieces. Inside the warehouse, the atmosphere was tense. Marcos and Ellis stood in the center of the room, surrounded by armed guards. Pallets of goods lined the walls, some concealing illicit items. Ethan and Laura entered through a side entrance, their movements silent and precise. Sarah, stationed outside with Victor, listened anxiously through her earpiece. As Ethan and Laura moved closer, they overheard snippets of the conversation between Marcos and Ellis. "We need to expand distribution," Ellis said. "The demand is growing, and the authorities are too slow to catch on." Marcos smirked. "Consider it done. My men are reliable." Ethan signaled to Laura, capturing the exchange on a hidden camera. But just as they were about to retreat, a guard noticed them. "Hey, who are you?" The guard barked, raising his weapon. The warehouse erupted into chaos. Ethan and Laura ducked behind a stack of crates as gunfire rang out. Ryan's voice crackled through the earpiece. "I'm calling for backup. Hold your position." Outside, Sarah clutched her earpiece, her heart pounding as she heard the commotion. "Victor, we have to help them," she urged. "Stay here," Victor ordered. "If they need us, they'll signal." But Sarah couldn't stand by. Grabbing a flashlight, she crept toward the side entrance, determined to assist in any way she could. Inside, Ethan and Laura managed to disable several guards, but the fight was far from over. Marcos and Ellis attempted to flee through a hidden exit, their plans unraveling. "Ethan, they're heading west," Ryan reported. "You need to cut them off." Ethan nodded to Laura. "Go after Ellis. I'll handle Marcos." As Ethan pursued Marcos through the maze-like warehouse, Sarah appeared, her flashlight illuminating his path. "Sarah, what are you doing here?" Ethan demanded, his tone a mix of frustration and concern. "I couldn't stay outside," she replied, her voice steady despite the danger. "I'm here to help." Ethan sighed, knowing there was no time to argue. "Stay close." Together, they cornered Marcos in an office. The crime lord sneered as Ethan advanced, his bravado masking fear. "You think this ends with me?" Marcos taunted. "You have no idea how deep this goes." Ethan ignored him, restraining Marcos with zip ties, as Laura and Victor arrived with Ellis in custody. As the team regrouped outside, Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her. Marcos and Ellis were finally in the hands of the authorities, their network beginning to crumble. Ethan placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You were brave tonight, Sarah." She met his gaze, a flicker of hope in her eyes. "We're one step closer to ending this." But as they drove away from the warehouse, Ethan couldn't shake Marcos's ominous words. The fight was far from over, and he knew the stakes would only grow higher. The aftermath of the warehouse raid left a palpable tension hanging in the air. Ethan Carter sat in his office, the city's skyline stretching endlessly beyond the glass walls. He replayed the events of the previous night in his mind. The chaos, the adrenaline, and the haunting words of Marcos. "You have no idea how deep this goes." His phone buzzed, pulling him back to the present. Ryan's name flashed on the screen. "Ethan, I've gone through the footage we captured at the warehouse," Ryan began. "It's worse than we thought. There's evidence of shipments moving overseas, and Ellis wasn't just a financier. He was orchestrating operations on the West Coast." Ethan gripped the edge of his desk. "We need to move fast. If we don't cut off their roots, they'll regroup and adapt." Across town, Sarah was at the safe house, pacing the living room, while Lily napped in the bedroom. Her hands trembled as she scrolled through a news article on her phone, detailing the raid. The headline praised the effort to dismantle a trafficking ring, but made no mention of her or Ethan's involvement. A small relief amidst her constant worry. Victor entered, carrying a tray of tea. "You need to calm down, Sarah. Stress won't help Lily." "I know," Sarah replied, her voice strained. "But every time I think we're safe, something happens to remind me we're not." Victor placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Ethan's doing everything he can. And so are you." Sarah nodded, but her unease lingered. Later that day, Ethan and Detective Laura Mason convened at the precinct. The evidence gathered from the warehouse had led to several arrests, but key players, including Marcos's elusive second-in-command, remained at large. Laura spread out a map on the table, marking key locations connected to Marcos's network. We've tracked one of their high-value targets, Santiago Alvarez, to a safe house in Tacoma. He's responsible for coordinating shipments. If we can capture him, we might unravel the entire operation. Ethan studied the map. What's the plan? We're organizing a raid, but it'll take time to get the green light, Laura replied. In the meantime, I suggest we keep a close watch on Santiago's movements. Time isn't on our side, Ethan said, his frustration evident. What if we lose him? Laura smirked. You really don't like waiting, do you? As evening fell, Ethan returned to the safe house to check on Sarah and Lily. He found Sarah in the kitchen, preparing dinner while Lily played nearby. The sight of them brought a rare moment of calm to his chaotic day. How are you holding up? Ethan asked, leaning against the counter. Sarah glanced at him, a faint smile breaking through her worry. Better, knowing you're here. Lily toddled over to Ethan, clutching a toy car. Play, Ethan, she demanded, her giggles filling the room. Ethan knelt to her level, taking the toy with a smile. Anything for you, kiddo? Meanwhile, Ryan worked tirelessly in his surveillance van, parked a few blocks away from Santiago's suspected hideout. Cameras and monitors displayed live feeds of the property, capturing every movement. Suddenly, an alert flashed on his screen. Santiago emerged from the building, flanked by two men, and entered a black SUV. Ethan, we've got movement, Ryan reported through the comms. Santiago's on the move. Ethan, still at the safe house, grabbed his jacket. I'm on my way. Laura, meet me at Ryan's location. Sarah stood in the doorway, her expression a mix of fear and determination. Be careful. Ethan paused, placing a reassuring hand on her arm. I'll be back. I promise. The SUV led the team to an abandoned factory on the outskirts of Tacoma. Ethan, Laura, and a tactical team surrounded the building, their movements silent and deliberate. Inside, Santiago and his men were discussing their next shipment. Ethan signaled to Laura. We need him alive. He knows too much. As they moved into position, a creaking floorboard gave away their presence. Gunfire erupted, the deafening sound echoing through the factory. Ethan dove behind a stack of crates, his heart pounding. Stay low, Laura shouted, returning fire. In the chaos, Santiago attempted to escape through a side door. Ethan spotted him and pursued, sprinting through the maze of corridors. He tackled Santiago just as the man reached an exit, pinning him to the ground. It's over, Santiago, Ethan said, his voice cold. You're not going anywhere. Santiago sneered. You think taking me down will change anything? You're just scratching the surface. Ethan tightened his grip. Then start talking. Back at the precinct, Santiago was placed in an interrogation room. Laura and Ethan watched from behind the one-way mirror as the detective on duty questioned him. You're looking at life in prison, Santiago, the detective said. Cooperate, and we might cut you a deal. Santiago leaned back in his chair, a smirk playing on his lips. You're barking up the wrong tree. I answer to people who could destroy you with a phone call. Ethan turned to Laura. We need more leverage. The breakthrough came later that night. Ryan uncovered a ledger hidden in Santiago's office, detailing shipments, payments, and names, one of which sent a chill down Ethan's spine. Richard Ellis, the same man who had seemed untouchable, was now implicated in the network. Ethan's mind raced. This is it. This is what we need to bring him down. Laura nodded. We'll need to handle this carefully. Ellis has connections everywhere. As dawn broke, Ethan returned to the safe house, exhausted but resolute. Sarah greeted him at the door, her concern evident. Did you get him? She asked. Ethan nodded. We've got Santiago. and we've got evidence tying Ellis to the operation. Sarah's shoulders sagged with relief. What happens now? Ethan placed a hand on her shoulder. We keep fighting. We're getting closer to ending this. The tension of recent events lingered in the air, like a storm that refused to pass. Ethan Carter found himself pacing the polished floors of his penthouse, staring out at the cityscape of San Francisco. His thoughts raced. Santiago Alvarez was in custody, but the pieces of the puzzle were still scattered. At the heart of it all was Sarah Williams and her daughter, Lily. Protecting them had become more than just a responsibility. It was personal. At the safe house, Sarah busied herself with mundane tasks, trying to distract from the turmoil brewing around her. Lily sat at the kitchen table, drawing on a pad of paper, her innocent giggles a stark contrast to the gravity of the situation. "Look, Mommy, it's you and me and Ethan," Lily exclaimed, holding up a crayon sketch of 3 stick figures under a big yellow sun. Sarah smiled, though her heart was heavy. "That's beautiful, sweetheart," she said, kissing Lily's head. She glanced out the window, the shadows of her past, and the dangers of the present creeping into her thoughts. Ethan's phone buzzed, breaking his reverie. It was Detective Laura Mason. "Carter," she said, her voice sharp. "We've got a problem." "What now?" Ethan replied, already bracing himself for the worst. "Marcos's network is retaliating. One of our informants was attacked last night, and Santiago's starting to crack. He's given us names, but he's also pointing fingers at Sarah." Ethan froze. "What do you mean?" "They're trying to paint her as an accomplice," Laura explained. "Leaked documents, false claims. They're playing dirty to shift the heat." Ethan's grip on the phone tightened. "We need to clear her name. I'll handle this." At the precinct, Laura and Ethan reviewed the fabricated evidence. It was sloppy but damaging enough to create doubt. Photos of Sarah at locations connected to the network were clearly doctored, but they could still tarnish her reputation. "We need to flip this," Ethan said. "Turn their lies against them." Laura nodded. "I'll have my tech team dissect the files. In the meantime, you need to make sure Sarah stays safe and out of sight." Ethan arrived at the safe house, his presence immediately calming Sarah's nerves. She could see the concern etched on his face. "What's wrong?" she asked. "They're targeting you, Sarah," Ethan said bluntly. "Leaking fake evidence to make it look like you were involved." Sarah's face paled. "But that's not true." I know," Ethan interrupted, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We're working on it. But you need to be careful." Sarah hesitated, then nodded. "I can't let Lily get caught in this." "You won't," Ethan promised. "We'll fight this together." Meanwhile, Ryan continued to investigate the network's operations. His findings led him to a secluded warehouse on the outskirts of the city, a suspected hub for Marcos's activities. With Ethan's approval, Ryan installed surveillance equipment, capturing footage of suspicious shipments and meetings. One evening, the cameras caught a man Ethan recognized, Richard Ellis. The revelation was a punch to the gut. Ellis was not just a benefactor of the network, but one of its architects. Ethan shared the footage with Laura. "This is it," he said. "This ties Ellis directly to Marcos." Laura frowned. "It's damning, but we need more. We have to follow the money." Back at the safe house, Sarah decided she couldn't remain passive. With Ethan's encouragement, she began taking self-defense classes and meeting with legal advisors. Each step gave her a sense of empowerment, though the weight of her circumstances still loomed large. One evening, after a particularly grueling training session, Sarah sat with Ethan on the couch. Lily was asleep in the next room. "Thank you," Sarah said softly, "for everything you've done for me and Lily." Ethan smiled, his eyes meeting hers. You don't have to thank me, Sarah. You're stronger than you realize. The moment lingered, a quiet acknowledgement of the bond forming between them. Despite their progress, danger was never far. One night, Ethan received a chilling email, a video of Lily playing at a park, taken from a distance. The message was clear. Marcos's allies were watching. Ethan immediately called Laura. We have a new problem, he said, forwarding the video. Laura's voice was grim. They're escalating. We'll increase patrols around the safe house, but you need to stay vigilant. Ethan hung up, his resolve hardening. They won't touch her, he muttered. As tensions mounted, Ethan and Laura devised a plan to expose Ellis and the broader network. A charity gala hosted by Ellis provided the perfect opportunity. Ethan proposed using Sarah as bait, a risky move that Sarah agreed to, despite Ethan's objections. I need to do this, Sarah said firmly. If it helps bring them down, I'm in. Ethan reluctantly agreed. We'll keep you safe, he said, I promise. The night of the gala was electric with anticipation. Sarah, dressed in a simple yet elegant gown, entered the grand ballroom with Ethan by her side. Their presence drew curious glances, but Sarah held her head high, determined to play her part. Ellis greeted them with his signature charm, unaware of the storm brewing around him. Ethan, what a surprise, he said, his tone oily. And who is this lovely guest? This is Sarah, Ethan replied, his voice cool. She's working with me on a new initiative. Ellis raised an eyebrow but said nothing more. As the evening progressed, Ethan signaled to Laura, who was stationed nearby with a team of undercover officers. Ryan, monitoring from a surveillance van, reported that Marcos's second-in-command was in the building. The tension reached a boiling point when Sarah excused herself to the restroom. Moments later, Ryan's voice crackled over the comms. Ethan, we've got a problem. Sarah's being followed. Ethan's heart raced. Where? South Corridor, Ryan replied. I'm pulling up the cameras now. Ethan moved quickly, his mind focused on one thing, protecting Sarah. In the dimly lit corridor, Sarah turned a corner and came face to face with Marcos's second-in-command. His expression was menacing as he blocked her path. Going somewhere, he sneered. Sarah's breath caught, but she stood her ground. What do you want? Before he could respond, Ethan appeared behind him. Step away from her. The man turned, sizing Ethan up. You shouldn't have interfered, Carter. And you shouldn't have underestimated me, Ethan shot back. A tense standoff ensued, broken only when Laura and her team arrived. The man was arrested, and Sarah was escorted back to safety. The gala ended with Ellis's arrest, his connections to Marcos laid bare. The operation was a success, but the battle was far from over. As Ethan and Sarah left the ballroom, the weight of their actions hung between them. We did it, Sarah said, her voice tinged with exhaustion. Ethan nodded. But this is just the beginning. As they drove back to the safe house, Ethan glanced at Sarah, admirations and protectiveness intertwining in his gaze. He knew the road ahead would be treacherous, but he also knew they would face it together. The quiet of the safe house was deceptive, a fragile illusion of peace in the storm that continued to brew. Ethan Carter stood at the large window of the living room, looking out at the city lights that flickered like distant stars. The events of the gala had been a temporary victory, but the stakes were escalating. Marcos's network was vast, and their retaliation was inevitable. Sarah Williams sat on the couch, Lily nestled beside her, flipping through a storybook. Ethan turned to watch them, his heart heavy with the weight of his next decision. He had promised to keep them safe, but the threats were multiplying. As Sarah's soft voice narrated the tale to Lily, Ethan's phone buzzed. He stepped into the hallway to answer. Carter. Laura Mason's voice came through, urgency laced in every word. We've analyzed the intel from the gala. Marcos's syndicate is planning something big, and it's happening soon. Ethan frowned. What kind of something? Trafficking and money laundering on a scale we haven't seen before, Laura explained. And they're using the upcoming gala in Seattle as cover. It's hosted by one of their key allies. Ethan felt a chill run through him. Sarah's already been through enough. I can't ask her to put herself in danger again. Laura hesitated. I understand. But she's our strongest link. Marcos's syndicate knows her face, and that makes her both a target and a tool for drawing them out. Ethan clenched his jaw. There has to be another way. Not without losing the chance to dismantle their operation for good, Laura said. Think about it, Ethan. I'll need your decision soon. Later that evening, Ethan shared the conversation with Sarah. She listened intently, her expression a mix of fear and determination. They want me to be bait again, Sarah said quietly, looking down at her hands. I said no, Ethan replied firmly. You've been through enough. But if it means stopping them, Sarah said, her voice growing steadier, then maybe it's worth it. Ethan sat beside her, taking her hand. Sarah, I can't ask you to do this. You've already risked so much. I want to do this, she said, meeting his gaze. For Lily. For every mother who's been in my shoes. If we can stop them, I'll be able to sleep at night knowing I did something. Preparations began immediately. The gala was less than a week away, and every detail mattered. Ethan enlisted the help of his cybersecurity expert, Sophie, who had uncovered critical connections within Marcos's network. Sophie's findings painted a clear picture of the syndicate's operations, but also revealed a troubling pattern. Several insiders within law enforcement and major corporations were involved. This isn't just a criminal network, Sophie said during a briefing. It's a system. Taking them down will take precision, and we can't afford mistakes. Ethan nodded, his mind racing with contingency plans. He glanced at Sarah, who was absorbing every detail with a calm exterior. He admired her resilience, even as he worried for her safety. The day of the gala arrived. Sarah stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the elegant yet understated dress she had chosen. Lily was safely staying with a trusted friend of Ethan's, her giggles echoing faintly in Sarah's mind as she prepared for what lay ahead. Ethan approached, his reflection appearing behind her in the mirror. You don't have to do this, he said again, his voice softer now. Yes, I do, Sarah replied, turning to face him. And I'm ready. They arrived at the gala together. The grandeur of the event, a stark contrast to the tension coursing through them. Guests mingled, laughter, and the clink of champagne glasses filling the air. Sarah scanned the room, her nerves hidden beneath a composed facade. Ellis is here, Ryan's voice came through Ethan's earpiece. He just entered through the west wing. Got it, Ethan replied, subtly signaling to Sarah. As the evening progressed, Sarah played her role perfectly, engaging in conversations and drawing attention from key figures in the syndicate. Meanwhile, Ethan and Laura coordinated their team, keeping a close watch on every move. The tension reached its peak when Sarah excused herself to the terrace. Ellis followed her, his demeanor oozing suspicion. You've been making waves, Miss Williams, Ellis said, his tone laced with menace. What exactly are you hoping to achieve here? Sarah's heart pounded, but she held her ground. I'm just trying to live my life, she said calmly. Is that so hard to believe? Ellis smirked. In our world, everyone has a price. I wonder what yours is. Before Sarah could respond, Ethan appeared. Her price is none of your business, he said, his voice cold. Ellis's expression darkened, but before he could retort, Laura's team moved in. The operation unfolded rapidly, with undercover officers detaining key figures and securing evidence. Ellis was arrested, his web of corruption unraveling. Back at the safe house, Ethan and Sarah debriefed with Laura. The operation had been a success, but the fight was far from over. They'll regroup, Laura said. Marcos's syndicate won't go down without a fight. We'll be ready, Ethan replied, his resolve unshaken. As Laura left, Ethan turned to Sarah. You were incredible tonight, he said. I don't know how you stayed so composed. I had too, Sarah replied. For Lily. And for us. Ethan smiled, a rare moment of genuine warmth. We're going to win this, Sarah. Together. The night ended quietly, with Ethan sitting by the window, his thoughts filled with the challenges ahead. He glanced at Sarah and Lily, who had fallen asleep on the couch, their faces peaceful, despite everything they had endured. Ethan whispered to himself, no matter what it takes, I'll keep them safe. The promise hung in the air, a silent vow to protect the fragile alliance they had built and the future they were fighting for. The morning after the gala was deceptively serene. The sun spilled through the windows of Ethan's penthouse, painting the space in warm hues. Yet, beneath the golden light, a storm brewed. Ethan sat at his kitchen island, sipping coffee while scanning the morning headlines on his tablet. His heart sank as he saw the bold font plastered across every major outlet. Tech tycoon, tied to criminal syndicate. Ethan Carter's alleged role in the Marcos network. The article painted a damning picture, linking Ethan to Marcos's organization through fabricated evidence. Anonymous sources claimed his company was involved in laundering funds for the syndicate. The accusations were baseless, but the damage to his reputation was undeniable. Sarah entered the kitchen with Lily in her arms, her face still carrying the weight of the previous night. Ethan, what's wrong? She asked, noticing his tense expression. He slid the tablet across the counter. It's starting, he said grimly. Sarah read the headline, her face paling. This is a lie, she said, her voice trembling. They're trying to discredit you. Ethan nodded. It's a tactic. They're trying to shift the focus off themselves by dragging me into the mess. But people will believe it, Sarah said, holding Lily tighter. What can we do? Ethan set his coffee down, his jaw tightening. We fight back. We expose the truth. As the day progressed, the fallout from the media storm grew. Ethan's business partners called incessantly, demanding explanations and assurances. Investors threatened to pull out, and board members scheduled an emergency meeting. Ethan's assistant, Sophie, worked tirelessly to control the damage, but the situation was spiraling. We need a statement, Ethan, Sophie said, her voice taut with urgency. Something to reassure the public and the investors. Ethan shook his head. No statement until we have undeniable proof. Anything I say now will just be twisted against me. Meanwhile, Sarah faced her own battle. The fabricated evidence also implicated her, painting her as a willing accomplice in the syndicate's operations. Social media was ruthless, with strangers accusing her of exploiting Ethan and using Lily as a prop to gain his sympathy. Tears welled in Sarah's eyes as she scrolled through the hateful comments. They're destroying us, she whispered. Ethan placed a hand on her shoulder. They're trying to break us, Sarah. But they won't succeed. We'll get through this. Sarah looked up at him, her eyes fierce despite her tears. I won't let them take Lily's future from me. I'll fight too. That evening, Ethan called a meeting with Sophie, Ryan, and Detective Laura Mason. They gathered in his study. the atmosphere heavy with determination. "We need to trace the source of this smear campaign," Ethan said. "Find out who's behind it and why." Laura nodded. "I've already started digging. Marcos's network has deep roots, but this level of coordination suggests someone higher up is pulling the strings," Sophie chimed in. "I've analyzed the digital fingerprints on the leaked documents. They are coming from a secure server that's heavily encrypted. It's going to take time to crack." "Then we don't have a moment to waste," Ethan said. "Let's get to work." Over the next few days, the team worked tirelessly. Sophie delved into the digital trail, while Laura pursued leads within law enforcement. Ethan used his connections to gather intel, leveraging favors and calling in allies he hadn't spoken to in years. Sarah, determined to contribute, began preparing a public statement. "I want people to hear my side," she told Ethan. "I need them to know the truth." Ethan hesitated. Are you sure? Once you go public, there's no going back." Sarah nodded. "It's the only way to fight their lies." On the day of the press conference, Sarah stood at a podium, her hands gripping the edges tightly. Cameras flashed, and reporters shouted questions, but she remained composed. "I am Sarah Williams," she began, her voice steady. "A mother, a survivor, and someone who refuses to be silenced by lies." She recounted her story, from fleeing her abusive past to finding safety with Ethan's help. She spoke of the dangers of Marcos's network and her determination to see justice served. As she finished, applause erupted from the crowd. But amidst the support, there were still murmurs of doubt and skepticism. Sarah knew the battle for public trust was far from over. Back at the penthouse, Ethan received a call from Sophie. "Ethan, I've cracked the server," she said, her voice breathless with urgency. "The smear campaign is being orchestrated by a shell company tied to one of your largest competitors." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Who?" Sophie hesitated. "Ellis Vaughn." Ethan's breath caught. Vaughn was a prominent philanthropist and CEO, someone Ethan had once considered a friend. The betrayal cut deep. "Send me everything," Ethan said. "We're going to expose him." That night, as Ethan and Sarah sat together, reviewing the evidence against Vaughn, Lily toddled over to them, clutching her favorite stuffed animal. "Are you sad, Mommy?" Lily asked, her innocent eyes full of concern. Sarah pulled Lily into her lap, tears prickling her eyes. "No, sweetheart. Mommy's just thinking." Ethan watched the tender moment, his resolve hardening. "We'll win this, Sarah," he said. "Not just for us, but for her." The next day, Ethan held his own press conference. He presented the evidence against Vaughn, revealing the orchestrated campaign to discredit him and Sarah. The revelation sent shockwaves through the media, shifting the narrative in their favor. As the conference ended, Ethan returned to the penthouse, exhausted but hopeful. Sarah greeted him at the door, her smile warm and genuine. "You did it," she said. "We did it," Ethan corrected. "But it's not over yet." The dawn broke over San Francisco with a rare serenity. Ethan stood on the balcony of his penthouse, the crisp morning air clearing his mind. Below, the city hummed to life, unaware of the battles he had fought and the truths he had uncovered. The press conference exposing Ellis Vaughn had shifted the tide in his favor, but he knew the war was far from over. Inside, Sarah was preparing breakfast. The smell of pancakes filled the kitchen as Lily, perched on a stool, giggled while stirring the batter. Sarah glanced toward the balcony, catching sight of Ethan deep in thought. She approached, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. "You look like you're miles away," she said softly. Ethan turned to her, his expression softening. "Just thinking about what's next. We've made progress, but there's still so much to do." Sarah nodded, her gaze determined. Then let's do it together. Later that morning, Ethan met with Sophie, Ryan, and Detective Laura Mason in his office. The room buzzed with a sense of urgency as they discussed their next steps. Sophie began. The evidence we've gathered against Vaughn has sparked an internal investigation into his company. But Vaughn's connections run deep. He's not going down without a fight. Ryan chimed in. And Marcos's syndicate is still operational. Vaughn might have been a key player, but he wasn't the only one. Ethan leaned forward, his eyes steely. Then we keep pushing. What do we have on Marcos's international ties? Laura pulled out a file, spreading documents across the table. Marcos's operations extend beyond Seattle and San Francisco. He's connected to trafficking routes in Europe and Asia. We've identified several key associates, but they're highly protected. Then we target them, Ethan said. One by one, we dismantle this network. Meanwhile, Sarah took her first steps toward rebuilding her life. With Ethan's support, she enrolled in therapy sessions to process her trauma. Her therapist, Dr. Elaine Carter, was a compassionate and insightful woman who encouraged Sarah to explore her dreams and aspirations. You've survived so much, Sarah, Dr. Carter said during one session. What do you want your future to look like? Sarah hesitated, then said, I want to help others like me. Women who feel trapped, who think there's no way out. Dr. Carter smiled. That's a powerful goal. Let's work on making it a reality. Ethan, too, sought to use his resources for good. He reached out to Sophie with a bold idea, a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting survivors of trafficking and abuse. I want to create a safe space, Ethan explained, a place where people like Sarah can rebuild their lives. Sophie's eyes lit up. That's an incredible idea. We can start with the contacts we've made through this investigation. Let's make it happen, Ethan said. The days turned into weeks as Ethan and Sarah worked tirelessly to bring their visions to life. The nonprofit, named New Horizons, quickly gained traction, attracting support from philanthropists and activists. Sarah took an active role, speaking at events and sharing her story to inspire others. One evening, after a successful fundraiser, Ethan and Sarah sat together on the penthouse balcony. The city lights twinkled around them, a stark contrast to the darkness they had faced. I never thought I'd be here, Sarah said, her voice filled with emotion. Making a difference, feeling safe. It's all because of you. Ethan took her hand. No, Sarah, it's because of you. Your strength, your resilience, it's what inspires me. Their moment was interrupted by Ethan's phone buzzing. It was Sophie. We've got a lead, she said. Marcos's syndicate is planning a major operation in Seattle. If we act fast, we can intercept it. Ethan's jaw tightened. We're ready. Send me everything. The next morning, Ethan, Sarah, and Laura gathered to finalize their plan. Sophie had tracked Marcos's movements to a warehouse on the outskirts of Seattle. It was a hub for trafficking operations, and the team knew this was their chance to strike a critical blow. We'll need to coordinate with local authorities, Laura said, but we can't trust everyone. Marcos has eyes everywhere. Ethan nodded. Then we keep this tight. Only people we trust. Sarah hesitated, then said, I want to help. Ethan turned to her, concern etched on his face. Sarah, it's too dangerous. But I know how they operate, she argued. I can spot things you might miss. Laura placed a reassuring hand on Sarah's shoulder. We'll keep her safe, Ethan. She could be an asset. Reluctantly, Ethan agreed. All right, but you stay close to me at all times. That evening, the team set out for Seattle. The The tension in the air was palpable. As they approached the warehouse, Ethan's heart pounded as he glanced at Sarah, who sat beside him in the car. "Are you sure about this?" he asked. She met his gaze, her eyes steady. "Yes, for Lily, and for every woman who's still trapped in that nightmare." Ethan nodded, his respect for her growing with each passing moment. The operation was meticulously planned. Laura coordinated with a small team of trusted officers, while Sophie monitored the situation remotely, providing real-time updates. As they entered the warehouse, the scene was chaotic. Workers scrambled to hide evidence, and armed guards moved to block their path. Ethan and Sarah stayed close as Laura led the charge. "Over there," Sarah whispered, pointing to a hidden door. "That's where they keep the ledgers." Ethan signaled to Laura, who dispatched officers to secure the area. Inside, they found stacks of documents detailing the syndicate's operations, along with a list of high-profile associates. Suddenly, a commotion erupted as Marcos himself appeared, flanked by armed men. "Well, well," he sneered. "Look who decided to join the party." Ethan stepped forward, his voice steady. "It's over, Marcos. We have everything we need to bring you down." Marcos laughed, a cold, menacing sound. "You think you've won? This is bigger than me, bigger than all of you." Before anyone could react, a firefight broke out. Ethan shielded Sarah, pushing her behind cover as chaos unfolded around them. Laura's team moved swiftly, subduing Marcos's men one by one. In the end, Marcos was captured, his arrogance replaced by fury. As he was led away in handcuffs, he glared at Ethan. "This isn't over." Back at the penthouse, Ethan and Sarah sat in silence, processing the night's events. Lily slept peacefully in her room, blissfully unaware of the danger they had faced. "We did it," Sarah said softly. "We stopped him." Ethan nodded. "For now. But there's still so much to do." Sarah reached for his hand. "We'll do it together." Ethan looked at her, his heart full of gratitude and admiration. Together. The air in San Francisco buzzed with a charged energy the morning after Marcos's capture. News of the takedown had already begun to ripple through the media. Ethan sat in his office, reviewing the documents seized during the operation. Each paper was a piece of the puzzle, illuminating the vast network that Marcos had managed to weave. His phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Are you okay? You've been quiet today." Ethan smiled faintly, his fingers hovering over the screen before he replied, "Just working through everything. Let's meet for dinner tonight." That evening, Ethan arrived at Sarah's apartment. Lily greeted him with an excited squeal, her tiny arms outstretched as she toddled toward him. "Ethan," she chirped, clutching a plush bear he had given her weeks ago. Sarah appeared in the doorway, her face lighting up at the sight of him. "Come in," she said, stepping aside. The apartment, though modest, had become a warm sanctuary. It was a far cry from the fear and uncertainty they had faced just weeks ago. As Sarah prepared dinner, Ethan played with Lily, her giggles filling the room like a melody. When they finally sat down to eat, the conversation turned serious. "I've been thinking," Sarah began, her eyes fixed on her plate, "about everything we've been through, and how much you've done for Lily and me." Ethan reached across the table, placing his hand over hers. "You don't have to thank me, Sarah. I'm doing this because I care about you. Both of you." Her gaze lifted, meeting his. For a moment, the world outside seemed to fade away. "I care about you too, Ethan," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Their relationship deepened over the following weeks. Ethan found himself drawn to the warmth and resilience that Sarah embodied, while Sarah discovered a steady anchor in Ethan's unwavering support. Together, They began to imagine a future, a life free from fear and shadows. But their newfound happiness was not without its challenges. Marcos's network, though weakened, was far from dismantled. Sophie had uncovered new threats. Key players in Europe and Asia were mobilizing, their operations shifting to compensate for the losses in San Francisco. "They're retaliating," Sophie warned during a meeting at Ethan's office. "We've intercepted communications suggesting they're targeting your company." Ethan leaned back in his chair, his expression grim. "What do we know?" "Not much yet," Sophie admitted. "But they're planning something big. You need to prepare." True to Sophie's warning, strange events began to unfold. A cybersecurity breach at Ethan's company compromised sensitive client information, threatening to tarnish the reputation he had built. Anonymous emails flooded his inbox, each one more menacing than the last. "We're coming for you," one message read, accompanied by a blurred image of Ethan with Sarah and Lily. Determined to protect the people he cared about, Ethan hired a private security team to guard Sarah's apartment. He also intensified the measures at his company, working closely with Sophie to fortify their defenses. Despite the escalating threats, Ethan and Sarah refused to let fear dictate their lives. They spent weekends exploring the city with Lily, visiting museums and parks, and savoring the simple joys of being together. Each moment felt like a victory, a defiance of the forces trying to tear them apart. One evening, as they walked along the Embarcadero, the Golden Gate Bridge glowing in the distance, Ethan turned to Sarah. "I've been thinking about what you said, about wanting to help others like you. I want to make that happen." Sarah looked at him, her expression a mix of surprise and hope. "You mean the nonprofit?" "Yes," Ethan said. "We'll expand New Horizons, make it global. You'll lead it, Sarah. Your story, your courage. It'll inspire others." Tears welled in her eyes as she nodded. "Thank you, Ethan, for believing in me." But the shadows lurking in the background grew darker. Late one night, Ethan received a call from Sophie. "We've traced the latest cyber attack to a group in Shanghai," she said. "They're targeting your supply chain. If they succeed, it could cripple your operations." Ethan's jaw tightened. "What do we do?" "I'm already working on countermeasures," Sophie assured him. "But you need to stay vigilant. They're not just after your company. They're after you." The next morning, Ethan called an emergency meeting with his executive team. Tensions ran high as he explained the situation, his usual composed demeanor replaced by an intensity that left no room for doubt. "This isn't just about business," he said. "It's personal, and I won't let them win." His determination galvanized his team, who pledged their support. But as Ethan left the conference room, he couldn't shake the feeling that the walls were closing in. That evening, Ethan and Sarah sat together in her living room, the weight of the threats pressing down on them. "I don't want you and Lily to get caught in the crossfire," Ethan said, his voice heavy with guilt. Sarah placed a hand on his cheek, forcing him to meet her gaze. "We're in this together, Ethan. I'm not running." Her words bolstered him, a reminder of the strength they had found in each other. But as they held each other, neither could ignore the storm gathering on the horizon. The storm hit the following week. An explosion rocked Ethan's company headquarters, shattering windows and setting off alarms. Thankfully, the building was evacuated in time, and no one was injured. But the message was clear. The syndicate was escalating its tactics. Ethan stood amidst the wreckage, his heart pounding with a mix of anger and resolve. "This ends now," he muttered under his breath. Sophie arrived moments later, her face pale but determined. "We've identified the source of the attack," she said. "It's coming from a front company in Hong Kong. If we hit them there, We can dismantle the syndicate's operations for good. Ethan nodded, his mind racing. Then we do it. Whatever it takes. That night, Ethan and Sarah sat together in the quiet of her apartment, their resolve unwavering. We're going to end this, Ethan promised, his voice steady. And then what? Sarah asked, her eyes searching his. Ethan took her hand, his heart full of conviction. Then we build the life we've always dreamed of. As they held each other, the shadows outside seemed less daunting. Together, they would face whatever came next, their love a beacon of hope in the darkness. The room was dimly lit, the only illumination coming from the glow of screens, displaying maps as dossiers and surveillance footage. Ethan stood at the head of the table, flanked by Sophie, Detective Laura Mason, and Ryan, his trusted private investigator. The gravity of their mission was palpable as they prepared to confront Marcos's syndicate head-on. We've identified the syndicate's command center in Hong Kong, Sophie began, pointing to a marked location on the map. It's disguised as a luxury shipping logistics company, but inside, they're coordinating human trafficking routes, laundering money, and distributing black market goods. Detective Mason crossed her arms, her expression stern. This operation is massive, and they've got local authorities in their pocket. If we're going to take them down, we need irrefutable evidence and the element of surprise. Ethan nodded, his jaw tight with determination. We've come too far to back down now. We take the fight to them, expose their operations, and ensure they can't hurt anyone else. As they finalized their plans, Sarah entered the room, her face set with quiet resolve. I'm coming with you, she said firmly. Ethan turned to her, his concern evident. Sarah, it's too dangerous. You and Lily should stay somewhere safe. Sarah stepped closer, her voice unwavering. This started because of my father and the life I was forced to escape. I need to see it through, to make sure no one else goes through what we did. Ethan hesitated, but saw the determination in her eyes. He nodded. All right. But you stay close to me, and we follow the plan to the letter. The following night, the team gathered at a private airstrip. A chartered jet waited to take them to Hong Kong, its engines humming softly. Ethan glanced at Sarah, who held Lily close and gave her a reassuring smile. We'll get through this, he promised. The flight was tense, the air filled with a mix of anticipation and apprehension. Sophie worked tirelessly on her laptop, coordinating with contacts in Hong Kong to ensure their arrival would go unnoticed. Detective Mason reviewed the operational details, her focus unyielding. Upon landing, the team was whisked away to a safe house in the outskirts of the city. From there, they would launch their assault on the syndicate. The morning of the operation, Ethan gathered everyone for one final briefing. This is it, he said, his voice steady. We've all sacrificed so much to get here. Today we finish what we started. Ryan handed out comms equipment, ensuring everyone was connected. Sophie detailed their infiltration plan, highlighting the roles each person would play. Sarah, equipped with a small camera and recording device, would enter the building under the guise of seeking employment, a role she knew all too well. Her job was to gather evidence from the inside, while Sophie monitored her movements from the surveillance van. Ethan and Detective Mason would lead a tactical team, prepared to breach the building once Sarah confirmed the location of the command center. As Sarah approached the building, her heart pounded in her chest. She was dressed in simple clothing, her hair pulled back, her demeanor carefully composed. She entered the lobby, where a receptionist greeted her with a perfunctory smile. I'm here about the job posting, Sarah said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. The receptionist gestured toward a seating area. Someone will be with you shortly. As Sarah waited, she subtly activated her recording device, scanning the room for anything suspicious. The walls were lined with opulent artwork, a stark contrast to the darkness she knew lurked within. Meanwhile, Ethan and the team waited in the surveillance van. Sophie's fingers flew across the keyboard as she monitored Sarah's feed. "She's inside," Sophie reported. "Everything's going according to plan." But just as she spoke, an alert flashed on her screen. "We've got company," she said, her voice tense. "A convoy of black SUVs is heading this way." Ethan's heart sank. "They know we're here." Detective Mason grabbed her radio, issuing orders to the tactical team. "Prepare for engagement. We can't let them reach the building." Inside, Sarah was escorted to an upper floor, where a man introduced himself as Mr. Liu, the head of operations. He exuded charm, but his eyes were cold, calculating. "So, you're interested in joining our team," he said, his tone casual but loaded with menace. Sarah forced a smile. "Yes. I heard this is a good place to work." Mr. Liu's expression hardened. "We don't hire just anyone. You'll need to prove your loyalty." Before Sarah could respond, the door burst open, and Marcos stepped in. His eyes locked onto Sarah, and a sinister smile spread across his face. "Well, well," he said. "Look who's back." In the van, Sophie's screen flashed red. "Sarah's in danger," she said urgently. "We need to move now." Ethan didn't hesitate. "Let's go." The tactical team stormed the building, their movements swift and coordinated. Gunfire erupted as they encountered resistance, the sound echoing through the halls. Ethan fought his way to the upper floors, his focus singular, finding Sarah. When he reached the office, he saw Marcos holding Sarah by the arm, a gun pressed to her side. "Let her go," Ethan demanded, his voice cold and commanding. Marcos laughed. "You think you can walk in here and take everything from me? You're a fool." Ethan raised his weapon, his aim steady. "This ends now, Marcos." The standoff was tense, the room crackling with anticipation. Sarah seized the moment, elbowing Marcos in the ribs and breaking free. Ethan fired, his shot grazing Marcos's shoulder. Before Marcos could react, Detective Mason and the tactical team stormed in, subduing him. The room erupted into chaos as they secured the area. In the aftermath, Sarah embraced Ethan, her body trembling. "It's over," she whispered. Ethan held her tightly. "You were incredible, Sarah. It's because of you that we've made it this far." As the authorities moved in to dismantle the syndicate's operations, Ethan and Sarah stood together, their bond stronger than ever. They had faced the darkness and emerged victorious. But as they left the building, Sophie approached with a grim expression. "We found something," she said, handing Ethan a folder. "This isn't over. There's a larger network out there." Ethan glanced at Sarah, his resolve unwavering. "Then we'll take them down too." The days following the takedown of Marcos's syndicate were a whirlwind of media coverage, legal proceedings, and quiet, reflective moments. Ethan Carter, once a figure of corporate ambition and cold efficiency, now found himself at the center of a story that captured the nation's attention. A tech billionaire turned hero, standing against the shadowy underworld of trafficking. In the warm glow of a San Francisco morning, Ethan stood on the balcony of his penthouse, watching the city come alive. Behind him, Sarah Williams emerged from the kitchen, holding 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to Ethan and joined him at the railing, Lily perched on her hip. "Do you think it's really over?" Sarah asked, her voice soft but tinged with uncertainty. Ethan took a sip of his coffee, his gaze distant. "Not completely," he admitted. "We've cut off one head of the beast. But Sophie's right. There's a larger network out there. We've only just begun. In the weeks that followed, Ethan and Sarah channeled their experiences into something transformative: the creation of the Carter Williams Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to supporting survivors of trafficking and dismantling the systems that allowed such atrocities to persist. The foundation's headquarters, located in a revitalized part of the city, became a hub of activity. Lawyers, social workers, and volunteers worked tirelessly, their efforts driven by the harrowing stories Sarah had shared and the hope she embodied. One morning, Ethan and Sarah held a press conference to announce the foundation's launch. Reporters filled the room, cameras flashing as Ethan stepped up to the podium. He adjusted the microphone, glancing at Sarah, who stood beside him with Lily in her arms. "Good morning," Ethan began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Today marks the start of something bigger than any one of us. The Carter Williams Foundation is not just a name, it's a promise. A promise to fight for those who've been silenced, to shine a light on the darkness, and to ensure that no one has to endure what Sarah and Lily have faced." The room erupted into applause, the energy palpable. Sarah stepped forward, her voice clear and resolute. "This foundation is more than a mission. It's a lifeline. To every survivor out there, know that you are not alone. We will fight for you. Together, we can build a future where fear has no place." As the foundation gained momentum, Ethan and Sarah decided it was time for a fresh start. They moved into a home on the outskirts of the city, a sprawling property with a garden where Lily could play freely. The house, with its open spaces and warm, inviting atmosphere, became a sanctuary. One afternoon, as they unpacked boxes in the living room, Sarah came across a photo album. She flipped through its pages, her fingers tracing the images of her past. A childhood marked by joy and struggle, memories of her mother, and the early days of Lily's life. Ethan noticed her quiet reflection and sat beside her. "What are you thinking?" he asked gently. Sarah looked at him, her eyes glistening. "I'm thinking about how far we've come. There was a time when I thought I'd never feel safe again. And now, I have this. I have you." Ethan smiled, his hand resting on hers. "You're stronger than you know, Sarah. And this is just the beginning." In the midst of their new life, Ethan received a message from his estranged sister, Amanda. The two hadn't spoken in years, their relationship strained by the demands of Ethan's career and Amanda's struggles with addiction. The message was simple: "I saw what you did for Sarah and Lily. I'm proud of you. Can we talk?" Ethan hesitated, memories of their last conversation flooding back, but Sarah encouraged him to reach out. "Family is worth fighting for," she said. "If there's a chance to heal, take it." A week later, Ethan met Amanda at a cafe near the foundation's headquarters. She looked healthier than he remembered, her eyes clear and hopeful. "I'm sorry," she said as they sat down. "For everything. I wasn't there when you needed me, and I pushed you away." Ethan shook his head. "We both made mistakes, Amanda. But I want to move forward. Let's start over." The siblings talked for hours, their conversation filled with laughter, tears, and the beginnings of reconciliation. As the foundation's work expanded, so did the challenges. Sophie uncovered evidence linking Marcus's syndicate to an influential international corporation. The discovery threatened to undermine the foundation's efforts as powerful figures moved to discredit Ethan and Sarah. One evening, while reviewing documents in the foundation's office, Ethan received an anonymous email. It contained a single sentence: "You're in over your head. Back off before it's too late." Ethan showed the message to Sophie and Sarah, his jaw tightening. "They're trying to scare us," he said. "But we're not backing down." Sophie nodded. "We'll trace the source. Whoever sent this is connected to the larger network." The threats only strengthened Ethan and Sarah's resolve. They held a fundraiser to rally support for the foundation, inviting allies, advocates, and survivors to share their stories. During the event, Sarah took the stage, her voice steady and filled with passion. "Fear once controlled my life," she said, "but I'm standing here today because of courage, love, and the unwavering support of people who refuse to give up on me. Together, we can create a world where no one has to live in fear." The audience rose to their feet, the applause a testament to the power of resilience and hope. As the months passed, Ethan, Sarah, and Lily settled into a life filled with purpose and joy. They celebrated milestones, from Lily's first steps in the garden to the foundation's first major legal victory against a trafficking ring. One evening, as the sun set over their home, Ethan and Sarah sat on the porch, watching Lily play with their dog. The air was filled with laughter and the scent of blooming flowers. Ethan turned to Sarah, his expression thoughtful. "Do you ever think about what's next?" he asked. Sarah smiled, her hand resting on his. "Every day. And as long as we face it together, I know it will be beautiful." Ethan nodded, his heart full. "Here's to building a future," he said, raising his glass of iced tea. "To love, resilience, and hope," Sarah added. As the stars began to dot the sky, the family sat together, their journey far from over, but filled with promise. The early morning sunlight filtered through the windows of the Carter Williams Foundation headquarters. The office hummed with activity, volunteers bustling between desks, phones ringing, and the soft murmur of conversations about ongoing cases. The foundation had grown rapidly, its mission resonating across the nation. For Ethan and Sarah, this was more than a victory. It was proof that change was possible. In a conference room filled with community leaders, lawyers, and survivors, Ethan stood at the head of the table. Behind him, a presentation outlined the foundation's latest initiatives, expanding shelters, increasing legal support for survivors, and partnering with local governments to reform outdated systems. His voice was calm but commanding, filled with the conviction that had come to define his leadership. "Change doesn't happen overnight," Ethan said, meeting the eyes of everyone in the room. "But with every survivor we support, every law we help pass, and every trafficker we take down, we're one step closer to a world where no one has to suffer in silence." The impact of the foundation reached far beyond San Francisco. Stories of its success spread across the country, inspiring other communities to take action. Sarah became the face of the movement, her journey from fear to empowerment, touching countless lives. She was invited to speak at events, her words igniting hope and determination. At a national conference on human trafficking in Washington, D.C., Sarah stood on a grand stage before a packed audience. The room fell silent as she began to speak. "I never imagined I'd be here today," Sarah said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "There was a time when fear consumed me, when I felt invisible. But today, I stand here because someone saw me, believed in me, and fought for me. Together, we can do the same for others. Together, we can be the light in the darkness." The audience erupted into applause, many wiping away tears. Among them were lawmakers, activists, and survivors, each inspired to take action. Back in San Francisco, Ethan found himself reconnecting with his estranged sister, Amanda. The years of distance between them melted away as they worked together to support the foundation. Amanda, now in recovery and training as a social worker, became an integral part of the team. One afternoon, As they prepared for a fundraiser, Amanda turned to Ethan. "I'm proud of you," she said, her voice tinged with emotion. "Not just for what you've done here, but for the person you've become." Ethan smiled, a rare softness in his expression. "And I'm proud of you, Amanda. We've both come a long way." Their reconciliation brought a sense of completeness to Ethan's life, reminding him of the power of family and forgiveness. Amid the foundation's successes, Ethan and Sarah's relationship deepened. They celebrated milestones as a family, from Lily's first day at preschool to quiet evenings spent together, dreaming of the future. One evening, under a canopy of stars in their garden, Ethan knelt before Sarah, holding a small velvet box. "Sarah," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion, "you've changed my life in ways I never thought possible. You've shown me what it means to love, to fight, and to believe. Will you marry me?" Tears filled Sarah's eyes as she nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "Yes." Lily, watching from the porch, clapped her hands excitedly, unaware of the gravity of the moment, but sensing its joy. The foundation's biggest event of the year was fast approaching. A gala to unveil their newest initiative, Project Horizon, designed to provide education and job training for survivors. The program aimed to empower individuals to rebuild their lives. On the night of the gala, the venue sparkled with elegance. Supporters from across the country gathered to celebrate the foundation's achievements and contribute to its future. Ethan took the stage, his speech a rallying cry for continued action. "Project Horizon is more than a program. It's a promise," he said. "A promise that every survivor deserves a second chance, a future filled with dignity and hope." When Sarah joined him on stage, holding Lily's hand, the crowd rose to their feet in applause. Together, they embodied the resilience and determination that defined the foundation's mission. As the gala wound down, Ethan received a message from Sophie, the ex-military hacker who had become an invaluable ally. She had uncovered evidence linking Marcus's syndicate to a global network with ties to influential figures. "We've only scratched the surface," Sophie said during a private meeting with Ethan and Sarah. "This network is bigger than we imagined. If we want to dismantle it, we'll need more resources and allies." Ethan nodded, his expression determined. "Whatever it takes," he said. "We're not stopping now." The next morning, Ethan and Sarah sat in the Foundation's office, reviewing plans for Project Horizon's expansion. Despite the challenges ahead, their determination remained unshaken. "What do you see for us in 5 years?" Sarah asked, her eyes searching his. Ethan smiled, his gaze filled with warmth. "I see a world where Lily grows up free from fear. I see a foundation that changes lives on a global scale. And I see us, standing together, making it happen." Sarah reached for his hand, her voice steady. "Then let's make it happen." As they worked late into the night, the office buzzed with energy and purpose. The foundation was no longer just a symbol of hope. It was a legacy, a testament to the power of resilience and love. As the screen fades to black, a instrumental melody plays in the background. The narrator's voice, warm and inviting, fills the air. Every journey begins with a single step, and this story is just the beginning. Ethan, Sarah, and Lily's fight for justice reminds us that hope can flourish even in the darkest moments, and that love, when nurtured, can change lives. But what lies ahead for them? What challenges will they face as they continue their mission? And what legacy will they leave for the world? The music swells slightly, carrying an undertone of inspiration and anticipation. Now, we'd love to hear from you. What do you think about Ethan and Sarah's story? What part moved you the most? And what would you do if you were in their shoes? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one, and your voice matters here. A gentle pause, giving space for the thought to sink in. And if you don't want to miss the next chapter in their journey, or more stories that touch the heart and spark the soul, make sure to hit that subscribe button below. Join our community of storytellers and dreamers as we continue to explore what it means to hope, to love, and to fight for a brighter tomorrow. The melody crescendos softly before fading into silence, leaving the viewer with a sense of connection and anticipation.